Content warning. This episode discusses historical and modern psychiatric practices, including institutional abuse, coercive treatments, racism, eugenics, forced sterilization, lobotomy, and the pathologizing of neurodivergent people. Nothing graphic is described, but the emotional weight is real. This is not medical advice. Please don't change medication or treatment without a licensed doctor. Your safety matters. Now, before we begin, a small warning. In this episode, we'll walk through several centuries of how institutions treated the ones who felt too deeply, saw too far, whose minds did not move in straight lines. The truth is heavy, even when whispered gently. If you need to pause, pause. If you need to breathe, breathe. This is not an attack on medicine or science or the tools that genuinely save lives. It is simply a tracing of how we arrived here, to a world where sensitivity can be punished, where vision can be pathologized, and where ancient ways of knowing were rewritten as disorder. If you are one of the ones who hum under their breath, who think in spirals, who feels storms in their ribs before they break across the sky, this story is for you. You are not broken. You are ancient. You carry a lineage older than diagnosis, older than the machine. Welcome to Bloodline, a story we forgot to tell. Hello everyone. I hope you are all well during this crazy bugger heat wave that is just draining. I don't know what you guys are going through. Here it's been a full week in the 40s and I'm just bored of it. I'm just so tired of it. I get absolutely drained with it. So I don't know when this episode will be out. I don't know what the temperatures will be like. But if you're still going through a heat wave, don't forget to hydrate yourself and don't drink just plain water. You know, plain water washes everything out of your body. So do some water and then do yourself a lemon water with a sprinkle of salt and replace your electrolytes. That's very important, okay? And to keep cool, one tip that I've learned is feet wet, hands and wrists wet, and face and neck if you can. There's also people that keep telling me, oh, put a wet towel around your neck. I tell you, I cannot stand the sensation of the cloth around my neck. But the feeling is good. It does refresh you, but it's just, I don't know. I just don't like the feeling of the cloth on my skin. I don't know. But for me, I'm just okay walking around absolutely like I came to this world. So wherever you are, whatever is going on with the temperatures, I hope you are okay. I hope you're looking after yourself. Go to river beaches if you can. Go to a swimming pool. I mean, have a cold shower. Whatever you have access to. If you have access to a little bit of cold water, man, fill yourself like a bucket and just pour it down you every half an hour or so to cool you down if you are struggling. I really hope you guys are doing okay because I am not. I am fed up, absolutely fed up because I like to be active and this heat just doesn't let up. And it's night, morning, daylight, you know, there's no break from it. So it's really hard to remain sane when it's so harsh. But again, there's no surprise, is it? And I'm going to go off on a bit of a rant here now. The other day, we were driving, we went to a river beach because we are living in a cork forest and it gets really, really hot. So we went to a river beach and on the way back, I was just watching this new agricultural land that was developed as an olive grove. And you could see just this brown gash in the mountain, on the forest, you know, right in the middle. And, you know, on both sides of the gash, you had just green forest. And it just made me think, of course, we are going under extreme heat and climate catastrophes, because how can we not, people? How can we not? We are destroying everything that keeps our planet in a sustainable, livable way. And we just keep chopping, don't we? I am in a rabbit hole at the moment about it all, because it's just so frustrating. We all say, oh, is the carbon emission? Sure, okay, like that's part of it. But flipping heck, man, we are destroying every tree, every river, every grove, everything. We're hacking this planet, and then wondering why we go through extreme heat waves in countries that never had a heat wave, in floods that just last for days and wipe everything away. I mean, it's endless, isn't it? And here we are complaining. I say, oh, the heat wave, another heat wave. But why? Because it's getting extreme now, isn't it? You have to realize it is getting extreme. I'm finding it like the weather is really extreme. Like there's an example here in Portugal. Lady had a forest planted around the 13th century, if I'm not mistaken, by King Afonso III, exactly to protect Leiria from the Atlantic winds, okay? And over time, it burned and it burned again, and management went unfunded, and then, the forest stopped existing. And early on this year, Portugal was hit by Storm Kristin, and Leiria really took the brunt of it, because there was nothing protecting it, not even a little bit, from that force that came from the Atlantic. And the same with the Amazon rainforest, and so on. It's all over the flipping world, okay? And what are we doing about it? Just complaining about the heat, complaining about the floods, complaining about the rain, complain about the cyclonic winds. Something has to come to a point where we just stop selling this planet of living infrastructure that keeps us alive and, gives us a world where we can live in. Like, we just have to stop hacking at it. It's just unbelievable. Sorry, rant over. I really hope you are okay. And, keep cool and hydrated. I'm trying to do the same. Now, before we begin, there is someone I need to acknowledge. This episode exists because of a message I received from now a friend named Alison. She introduced herself as, and I'm using her exact words here, autistic as fuck and an ADHDer, which honestly is the most bloodline introduction anyone has ever sent me. Alison runs a small business called Bazaar 13. She makes chainmail jewellery, handcrafted, one-of-a-kind, self-taught. Each piece carries a lineage. Irish patterns, Persian patterns, Japanese patterns. She tells you where each one comes from because she understands that origin matters. Once a piece sells, it's gone. They are all made with love and no shortcuts. She sent me a thread without knowing she was handing me an entire episode. A 3-parter episode, by the way. So hang tight, it is deep, it is long, and that's why I had to go into 3 parts. So Alison, this one is thanks to you. And for everyone listening, go and find her. She is on Instagram. Search Bazaar 13. She has amazing pieces of work. And honestly, just go and have a look. Show her some support, because this girl is absolutely amazing. Support the ones who make things with their hands and their history. I think handcrafted people and people that create things with their hands and are homemade, that, is so intricate and so creative. I really think we need to help our artistic people instead of the high street shops, So that's my message. And now we will start. Okay, let's get ready. Before the textbooks, before the diagnosis, before the world began dividing minds into categories, there was a figure painted in the dark. Deep in the Ariège region of southern France, inside a cave called Trois Frères, there is a chamber so hidden you can only reach it by crawling on your belly through a narrow stone artery. 13,000 years ago, someone carried fire into that darkness. Someone knelt in a chamber no bigger than a modern living room and painted a creature the world had never seen before. Half man, half stag. Tail like a horse. Eyes wide and focused. Body frozen mid-trance. The archaeologists call him the sorcerer, because they don't know what else to call a being so impossible. But the people who painted him didn't think he was impossible. They thought he was necessary. When the cave was discovered in 1914 by 3 teenage brothers and the antiquarian Abbé Breuil, I apologize if I'm saying this wrong. My French is very, very non-existent. I do apologize in advance, but let's keep going. So when the cave was discovered, Europe was fascinated. Scholars debated for decades. Was he a god? A shaman? A trickster? A hallucination? Breuil believed he had found the first portrait of a shaman in transformation, a human dissolving the boundaries of self to enter the animal world. Other scholars argued for years that the figure was too strange, too hybrid, surely symbolic, mythic, allegorical. But modern analysis, high-resolution photography, pigment dating, ethnographic comparison leaned back towards Breuil's intuition. This is not a fantasy creature. This is a human being in trance. And the chamber was designed for it. The walls were carved to catch firelight. As the torch flickered, the sorcerer's limbs appeared to sway. His antlers shimmered. His tail seemed to lift. He wasn't static. He was alive, animated by the same neurological magic that animates dreams and visions. What the archaeologists can measure, the pigments, the charcoal, the brushstrokes, tells them when and how. What they cannot explain is the mind behind the hand. Because the sorcerer is not simply a painting. He is a neurological portrait, a depiction of a brain that does not stay inside its edges, a mind that dissociates, shifts, crosses thresholds, see what others cannot see. The kind of brain the modern world would diagnose, categorize, medicate, or silence. But 13,000 years ago, they followed him into the dark and asked what he saw. Before the modern world invented the word disorder, the Lakota people already understood this truth. Some minds don't walk forward, they walk sideways through the world, and from that angle they see things others can't. They had a name for them, Heyoka, the sacred reverse thinkers, the thunderborn, the ones who carried lightning inside their bones. A Heyoka isn't chosen by people. A Heyoka is chosen by Walking-Jan, the thunder beings. You knew a child was Heyoka if they dreamed of lightning or if storm spirits appeared to them in sleep before puberty ever arrived. Not imagination, not coincidence. A calling. A sign that their inner world pulled in a different direction than everyone else's. A Heyoka does everything backward, not for attention, but because their mind follows a different rhythm. If people cried, a Heyoka might laugh. If people rushed forward, they walked backward. If the tribe froze in fear, the Heyoka became fearless. Their entire life was medicine through contradiction, a mirror turned upside down so others could see themselves clearly. Their presence broke tension. Their strangeness dissolved stagnation. Their unpredictability prevented rigidity. Difference wasn't a nuisance. Difference was the cure. They're often described in English as sacred clowns, but that translation is misleading. They weren't jesters or entertainers. They were empathic disruptors, the ones who held emotional truth by doing the opposite of what the tribe expected. If the community was stuck, Heyoka energy shook it loose. If grief swallowed everyone whole, the Heyoka turned grief inside out so the tribe could breathe again. If pride became too heavy, they used absurdity to humble the group before arrogance became danger. They were allowed to break rules because rules are fragile and the human spirit bends before it breaks. Can you imagine a Heyoka child today? Interrupting, questioning, contradicting, laughing at solemn moments, crying when others laugh, refusing rigid rules, absorbing emotions like a sponge, acting in metaphors not instructions? What the Lakota called sacred, the modern system calls behavioral problem, dysregulation, inappropriate effect, pathology. The same mind that once healed tribes would now be medicated, corrected, or punished into silence. Before books or diagnoses, there were people whose minds moved like rivers, deep, winding, patterned, Reading meaning in places, others saw only chance. In West Africa, the Yoruba people had a name for them. The Babalawo, the fathers of sacred knowledge, and the Iyanifa, the mothers. They were not fortune-tellers. They were pattern-seers, custodians of rhythm, interpreters of destiny itself. Ifa is one of the world's oldest divination systems, rooted in what is now Nigeria, Benin, and Togo. A living library of wisdom carried in bodies, not books. A diviner would kneel on sacred earth, cowrie shells in hand, smooth, glossy, shaped like the mouth of the ocean, or palm nuts, warm from their skin. They cast them across dust, not randomly, but with an awareness so deep that every fall became a sentence, every pattern a paragraph, every rhythm a message. To the untrained eye, the shells looked scattered. To a Babalawo or Iyanifa, they fell the way stars fall into constellations, revealing what was hidden beneath the visible world. Some were born into priestly families, descendants of lineages who carried Orunmila's breath the way others inherit eye color. But others were chosen by temperament. You knew a future diviner when you saw a child who could concentrate until the room dissolved, a child who slipped into trance without meaning to, a child who dreamed in symbols that later came true, a child who sensed patterns in chaos the way others sense sound or heat. The elders watched quietly. They paid attention to the ones who stared too long at water, or hummed while counting grains of sand, or seemed to live half in this world, half in another. What the Western world would later call obsessive, hyper-focused, too intense, too inward, was to the Yoruba the exact wiring required to carry divine sight. Because Ifa is not vague mysticism, it is structure, symbol, mathematics woven with breath. A diviner must memorize hundreds of Odu verses, oral knowledge passed across centuries. They must recognize patterns instantly, move between logic and intuition in one breath, enter altered states without fear, read symbols that arrive sideways, not linearly. To practice Ifa is to hold the left brain and the right brain in perfect conversation, to think like water and calculate like fire. The diviner is not speaking alone. They interpret the will of Orunmila, the Orisha of wisdom, destiny, and cosmic pattern. Through the fall of shells, the positions of palm nuts, the cadence of breath, the rhythm stacked on divine trays, the world speaks, the Babalawo listens. And the shape of someone's future, their path, their healing, their alignment, unfolds in symbols as old as creation. This was not fortune-telling. It was cosmic literacy, and the mind required to practice it, pattern-seeking, inward, intense, symbol-driven, wasn't treated as a problem. It was treated as a portal. Before the vulva ever lifted a staff, there were the Dizir, the ancestral mothers, the divine feminine forces who walked beside a family for generations, guarding it, guiding it, whispering warnings into the right dreams, lifting certain children toward the path of sight. They were not goddesses exactly, not spirits quite, something in between, felt in the prickle of skin before a decision, in the dream that wouldn't leave, in the sudden knowing that arrived without logic. And the Dizir chose the vulva. Not culture, not appointment, not training alone. Lineage. You recognized the future vulva early, the child who hummed while spinning wool, who wandered off to sit with stones, who stared at the fire until her eyes watered. The elders watched her carefully. These were not oddities. These were signs. Across the Old Norse world, Volur traveled from village to village carrying staffs tipped with iron, bone, or carved wood. These were not weapons. They were anchors, objects heavy enough, sacred enough to hold the body during trance. Because to practice Sedir, the vulva didn't sit still. She rocked, forward and back, side to side, a gentle rhythmic motion that every overwhelmed, sensitive, or neurodivergent body still knows instinctively. The rocking opened the veil opened the inner sight, and the inner sight opened everything else. The sagas say, she sat apart, eyes half closed, whispering what the gods refused to speak aloud. But she wasn't whispering to gods. She was whispering with them. Men respected her and feared her. Kings consulted her before sailing, before war, before marriage alliances. Farmers asked her when the land was sick, when the animals were restless, when the women's dreams grew dark. She spoke in woven metaphors, spirals of meaning, poetic riddles the literal-minded could not interpret alone. Her voice didn't give answers, it gave directions. A woman who sees without looking, knows without asking, and refuses straight lines cannot be controlled, which is why the vulva walked alone, traveling, observing, intervening only when asked or when the Dizir whispered that a thread was fraying. The sagas show her living apart, a tent on a hill, a seat near the fire but not in the circle, a woman half in, half out of the world. People brought her gifts to honor her power. Fine cloth, silver, furs, food, a place to sleep, and absolute respect. But they also kept a distance. You don't sit casually beside the woman who can unwind your fate and show you the truth you've been avoiding. The vulva carried loneliness the way she carried her staff, not as punishment, but as part of the ritual. Some lineages demand solitude as the price of sight. When she died, her staff was buried beside her. Archaeologists have found graves where the staff is longer than the body, resting like a serpent curled beside its keeper. One grave at Firkrat, Denmark, held a vulva buried in a cloak of blue, her staff heavy with iron rings, her grave filled with herbs, seeds, amulets, and ritual tools. They buried her like a queen, because she wasn't just a woman, she was living infrastructure, a psychological, spiritual, and emotional stabilizer for the tribe. The Dizir chose her, the people relied on her, the world bent differently around her. And the lineage survives, because somewhere in every generation, a child is born whose mind moves sideways, whose emotions arrive in waves, whose dreams speak louder than daylight. A child the Dizir still recognize. In Delphi, on the slope of Mount Parnassus, a woman sat above a fissure in the earth. Vapors rose, laurel burned. She entered trance and spoke with two voices. Kings waited for her words as if for sunrise. But she was not born a legend. She was a woman, Delphian, local, familiar, someone who once baked bread, walked the narrow streets, carried water from the spring, until the day the elder said, "She is the one." She did not need to be noble, or young, or untouched, just steady of heart, clear in conscience, unmoved by greed, and inward enough to feel the whisper beneath the world. The Greeks called it quiet disposition, not obedience, not meekness, but a mind turned inward, a psyche with its own gravity, its own tides, its own private weather, a woman whose inner world was louder than the external one. When she descended into the Aditon, she entered a room built directly over a fault line. The earth exhaled through cracks in the stone, ethylene-rich vapors rising like the breath of gods. She chewed laurel leaves, washed in the Castalian spring, and sat on a bronze tripod that trembled with the mountain's pulse. Then the world loosened, edges blurred, her voice split, one tone mortal, one tone borrowed. Her trance words spilled out in raw fragments, symbols layered over symbols, the kind of speech the ordinary ear could hear but not decode. And so the priests became translators, catchers of her lightning, turning her spirals of utterance into sentences the world could bear. For nearly 1,000 years, every city-state, every general, every philosopher came to hear her speak. Athens asked her before building its navy, Sparta before going to war. Socrates' fate was sealed because she called him the wisest of men. And then there was Croesus, as you say it, king of Lydia, drenched in gold and ego. He went to Delphi with one question. "If I go to war against Persia, will I win?" The Pythia replied, If you cross the Halit River, you will destroy a great empire. Croesus heard victory. He did destroy a great empire. His own. Persia crushed him. He mistook a serpent's whisper for a soldier's command. Prophecy is symbolic, not literal, pattern-based, not procedural, a language of association, not bullets and charts. And like so many men in power, he paid the price for misreading a woman who saw further than his entire empire combined. But the Pythias truth is older still. Before Apollo ever claimed the shrine, it belonged to Gaia, the Earth Mother. Her guardian was Python, the ancient serpent spirit coiled beneath the mountain. Apollo did not kill the serpent's wisdom. He merely took its name, the Pythia. Python Ea was the living daughter of that serpent line, a lineage of earth sight, dream sight, intuition, and trance. A lineage of women whose minds moved sideways, not straight, inward, not outward, deep, not wide. If she lived today, they would medicate her visions. They would quiet her dissociation, stabilize her voice, label her with a handful of disorders. But in her time, she was the axis around which the ancient world turned, the bridge between earth and the breath beneath it. The fire of the mind does not belong only to mountains. It burns in deserts too, in men who shook when the sky opened, in wanderers who spoke with voices too loud for their own bodies, in visionaries whose inner worlds was so consuming they could barely function in the outer one. The Hebrew prophets were not gentle men. They were intense, tormented, overtaken by visions that shattered their sense of ordinary reality. Ezekiel lay on his side for 390 days because a voice told him to. He baked bread over dung. He shaved his head with a sword. He saw creatures in the sky, chimeras with wings and wheels and eyes that modern readers still not can fully describe. Jeremiah cursed the day he was born. He heard God in thunder. He felt the nation's grief in his own stomach. He wept until his ribs hurt. Hosea married a woman because God commanded it as a living metaphor. Isaiah walked naked for 3 years for the sake of prophecy. If these men walked into a modern clinic, they would leave with multiple diagnoses. But the ancient world didn't judge the behavior. It judged the impact. Did the visions move nations? Did the words reshape history? Did the trembling carry truth? These men were not stable. They were incandescent. Their minds burned too hot for ordinary language. In their world, that burning was called anointing. In ours, it is called symptom. And yet, the words of Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Hosea, they survived, copied, preserved, translated, carried across 3,000 years. Not despite their strangeness, because of it. And across the Anishinaabe forests, the Lakota plains, the Sami tundra, the Aboriginal Red Center, communities watched the sensitive child, the intense one, the dream-sighted one, and asked not what was wrong with them, but what they were hearing, what doorway had opened, what the rest of the tribe needed them to see. The differently wired mind was not a problem to solve. It was infrastructure. But these pockets of old wisdom were small lights against a vast storm. Empires came with measurements, churches came with doctrine, governments came with order, medicine came with categories. The roles once held by the sensitive, the ecstatic, the dream-sighted were renamed, redefined, and finally reduced. Difference was once a doorway. Soon it would become a diagnosis. But the shift didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in quietly, a new idea here, a clever theory there, until the world of circles and spirits was slowly replaced by rulers, measurements, and clocks. For thousands of years, people believed the world was alive. Forests breathed, rivers remembered, dreams carried truth. Madness, grief, vision, and ecstasy were simply different doors into the same mystery. Those doors didn't close. They were dismissed. Between the 1500s and 1700s, Europe entered a project no other civilization pursued so aggressively: the systematic redefinition of reality. Not because people were cruel, but because their world was collapsing. Plague, famine, religious war, political chaos. And in a collapsing world, certainty feels safer than wonder. What began as curiosity slowly hardened into authority. What began as seeking evolved into system building. And what began as studying nature became an effort to control it. This new era called itself the Enlightenment, but to build its own light, it learned to extinguish everything that couldn't be measured. The architects of this worldview weren't trying to harm anyone. Most never imagined what their ideas would unlock. But the consequences spread into everything that followed: medicine, psychiatry, schooling, law, industry, social norms, and the invention of normality. If you want to understand how neurodivergence became a diagnosis instead of a calling, you must begin with the men who rewrote reality in straight lines. Francis Bacon, who believed nature was something to conquer. René Descartes, who split the human being in two. Isaac Newton, whose brilliance mechanized the cosmos. Their ideas became the operating system of the modern world, where the measurable is real and the unmeasurable is suspect. This is the moment where the intuitive, mystical mind, the mind once honored in caves, temples, forests, and tribes, begins to lose its place. Not because it was wrong, because it was inconvenient. We are entering the chapter where difference stops being a doorway and becomes a deviation. And standing at that doorway is Francis Bacon. Now, Francis Bacon was not a mystic, and he was not a healer. But he was a man who helped design the lens through which the modern world would view everything, including the human mind. He lived in an age terrified of uncertainty, plague, famine, religious bloodshed. Where ancient people saw spirits and cycles, Bacon saw something else: a universe that could be forced to give answers if approached with the right tools. But in Bacon's worldview, nature wasn't a partner. She was an adversary. He wrote openly, deliberately, that nature was a woman who must be, quote, bound to our service, made a slave, tortured to reveal her secrets. These were not metaphors. This was the theology of the new science. And powerful men loved it. The English crown, aristocrats, imperial planners, anyone who needed a worldview that justified expanding control over land, bodies, ecosystems, and eventually the mind. Bacon offered them the perfect philosophy: knowledge through domination, truth through force, order through interrogation. His experiments reflected this worldview. He tested on animals, condemned prisoners, paupers, women labeled hysterical, anyone considered disposable. Not out of malice, out of certainty. He believed intuition was unreliable. Dreams were idols, inner knowing was error, spiritual insight was noise. And in that moment, the ancient seer became the untrustworthy observer, the ecstatic mind became the defective one. Bacon didn't foresee what would happen next, but the universe answered him in its own sharp, poetic way. March 1626, Highgate, North London, a bitter, bone-cutting cold. Bacon was travelling in a coach when an idea struck him like lightning. If cold slows decay, could snow preserve meat? He ordered the coach to stop, bought a chicken from a villager, had it slaughtered on the spot, then began stuffing its body with snow on the side of a freezing road. Witnesses described him as fevered with inspiration, single-minded, oblivious, hyper-focused, frantic with the thrill of the experiment. Minutes later, his clothes soaked, his hands numb, his lungs filling, his body shaking, he still persisted. Still, he forced nature to comply. Only after the bird was fully packed with snow did he collapse. He was carried to a damp, unheated guest room, the worst place for a man already turning to fever. He died days later. The snow saved the chicken. It did not save the man who buried it. He died enacting his philosophy to the letter, forcing nature to obey even as she was killing him. His final experiment was absurd. His legacy was far more dangerous. Bacon didn't intend cruelty, but his worldview reshaped the entire future. Intuition became unreliable. Emotion became interference. Mysticism became superstition. The body became machinery. Nature became raw material, and the inner world stopped being evidence. This philosophy justified empire, industrialization, medical authority, psychiatric control, the invention of normal, the policing of difference, the disciplining of minds that moved too widely, too deeply, too strangely. Once the cosmos was treated as a machine, the human being would inevitably follow. Francis Bacon opened the door. René Descartes walked through it and split the human being in two. René Descartes didn't build institutions. He built the mindset that institutions would follow. Where Bacon changed how we treat the world, Descartes changed how we treat ourselves. He lived through religious terror, philosophers burned alive, wars over doctrine, a Europe where thinking the wrong thought could cost you everything. So he searched for one thing, one piece of bedrock that could not be taken from him. And he found it. I think, therefore I am. At first it feels clever, elegant, a philosophical tattoo. But hidden inside that sentence is one of the most consequential ideas in Western history, that the thinking mind is the only trustworthy part of a human being. Everything else, emotion, intuition, sensation, vision, dream, trance, became suspect, secondary, unreliable, non-truth. This is the moment the West decided that the inner world cannot be believed unless filtered through logic, and the consequences were enormous. Descartes claimed that the body and mind were two separate substances. The body, a machine, mechanical, predictable, matter. The soul, abstract, invisible, scientifically irrelevant. This split, the Cartesian dualism, became the foundation of Western medicine and eventually psychiatry. It justified treating the body as hardware, the mind as software, emotion as interference, visions as malfunction, trauma as error, neurodivergence as disorder. In one stroke, he severed what ancient cultures understood instinctively, that body, mind, spirit, and world are one continuous field. Where the Lakotas saw the Heyoka, Descartes saw dysfunction. Where Delphi saw the Pythia, Descartes saw hallucination. Where shamans saw trance, Descartes saw failure of reason. Where prophets saw symbols, Descartes saw instability. Not out of cruelty, out of fear. Fear of chaos, fear of emotion, fear of being wrong in a world that punished wrongness. His answer was simple. Cut the human being in half, and trust only the half he could measure. And here's where the story becomes personal, because Descartes was not the machine he wrote about. He battled intense sensitivities, obsessive thought spirals, prolonged withdrawal, vivid dreams he believed were divine, difficulty regulating emotion. But his philosophy had no room for an inner life that vivid, so he denied it, buried it, erased it. And in erasing himself, he made it easier for every generation that followed to erase anyone else whose inner world spoke louder than the outer one. Descartes gave structure to the world Bacon had begun. Bacon said, "Conquer nature." Descartes said, "Distrust in nature." Together they formed the foundation for everything that came later. The asylum, the diagnostic manual, medical authority over emotion, the concept of normal, the suspicion of the visionary mind, the punishment of difference. Once you believe the body is a machine, emotion is weakness, intuition is chaos, and the inner world cannot be trusted, the next step becomes inevitable. People must be corrected, disciplined, standardized, silenced. Descartes never built a cage, but without him, the cages could never have been justified, because you cannot lock someone away until you believe you are containing something real. The split is complete, and into that split steps Isaac Newton, a man whose mind burned too bright, too non-linear, and too haunted for the age that would adopt him as its saint. Isaac Newton never belonged to the world he transformed. The Enlightenment chose him as its poster saint of reason, the man who turned the heavens into equations. But the real Newton was nothing like the shrine they built around him. He was not calm, not balanced, not steady. He was brilliant, an obsessive, reclusive, spiritually tormented, withdrawn, volatile, looped into thought cycles he could not escape. Newton wasn't searching for order in the universe. He was trying to build order inside himself. He left behind 10 million words of private writing. Almost none were about physics. They were about alchemy, angels, apocalypse calculations, biblical timelines, esoteric symbols, visions, prophecy, the secret laws of creation, attempts to decode the mind of God. For over 2 centuries, this side of him was erased. Why? Because the Enlightenment needed a machine maker, not a mystic. They hid the man who saw symbols in starlight. They archived the alchemist. They dismissed the prophet. They buried the fire. They gave the world a sanitized ghost, not the man who lived. Newton worked in fevered trances, days without sleep, forgetting to eat, writing tens of thousands of words in a single obsessive swell, conducting chemical experiments in rooms filled with toxic fumes, shutting out the world for weeks, pushing a needle behind his own eye to understand how light behaved. That last detail is not metaphor. He documented it himself. Today we would recognize autistic pattern-seeking, hyperfocus, sensory self-experimenting, dissociation, episodes of mania, paranoia, emotional collapse, extreme sensitivity to criticism. But in his time, these had no language. So Newton tried to discipline the universe in the way he could never discipline his own mind. His laws, motion, gravity, optics, were revolutionary, but their power came from something deeper than accuracy: simplicity. He turned the chaos of the heavens into predictable patterns, not because his mind was cold, but because his mind was overwhelmed. His equations were not born of detachment. They were born of a desperate need for stillness. The Enlightenment took those laws and built a worldview from them. The cosmos is a machine. The body is a machine. The mind is a machine. And anything that does not behave mechanically is malfunctioning. Newton never said this, but the age that worshipped him did. So mystery was dismissed. Inner worlds lost value, and divergence became error. Newton's brilliance became a cage, for him, for the culture that followed, and for every mind that refuses straight lines. But despite the machine they built around his name, Newton himself remained fragile. Breakdowns, withdrawal, paranoid collapse, ruptured friendships, visions, guilt, grand purpose, utter despair. This was not the mind of a machine. It was the mind of a visionary dropped into a world that only valued order. Newton didn't belong to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment belonged to him, but only after it carved out everything human. Because Newton framed the cosmos as mechanical, the machine became the model for everything. Industry, medicine, education, law, psychiatry, prisons, asylums. And in a machine world, minds that move sideways become faults. People who feel too deeply become problems. Those who speak in symbols become dangerous. Those whose emotions disobey become defective. The mystics, the sensitives, the visionaries, the neurodivergent. The same minds the earliest humans followed into caves and asked what they saw, in the mechanical age they became errors to be corrected. Descartes, Bacon and Newton forged a worldview where logic is truth, emotion is weakness, intuition is superstition, nature is raw material, and difference is disorder. A world like this hunts what it cannot measure, and soon the age of measurement turned its gaze inward, toward the human being. The story now leaves theory and enters buildings. stone walls, locked doors, corridors of silence. The age of diagnosis is beginning. The Enlightenment didn't build a single asylum. It did something far deeper. It created the worldview that made asylums feel inevitable. Bacon taught Europe that nature must be controlled. Descartes taught Europe that inner experience could not be trusted. Newton gave Europe a universe that behaved like a clock. Together they forged a quiet cultural contract. Only what is predictable is real. Only what is measurable is valid. Only what is orderly is safe. At first the shift was subtle, a frost forming on glass. Then it thickened. Then it hardened. Until the world that once embraced mystics, dreamers, prophets, sensitives, pattern-seers, began to see them as strange. Not because they had changed, because the worldview had. By the 1700s and the 1800s, Europe was reorganizing itself around the same values that powered its machines: efficiency, productivity, discipline, uniformity, predictability. These values crept into factories, schools, churches, governments, medicine, family structure, and the definition of normal, whatever normal is. Okay, back then they had a obviously very distorted vision of what normal was, but there we go. That's why we're here. Industrialization didn't change economies, it changed expectations. Factories needed workers who were reliable, obedient, consistent, and replaceable. In other words, normal, according to them. Anyone who didn't behave that way, who felt too deeply, moved too freely, reacted too strongly, or dreamed too vividly, became a problem to solve, a deviation, a malfunction, a threat to the machine. Difference was no longer a doorway. It became a diagnosis waiting to happen. Before the Enlightenment, Europe had no unified system for human suffering. There were midwives, herbalists, mystics, healers, elders, people who interpreted experience through relationship and symbol. Healing was communal, meaning was shared. Then came a new impulse: sort everything, name everything, control everything. What Bacon did to nature, what Descartes did to the soul, what Newton did to the cosmos, Europe now did to the mind. People were classified the way botanists classified plants: melancholic, hysterical, morally insane, feeble-minded, deviant, erratic, disordered. A new professional class emerged. Not healers, not elders. Observers. Men who watched instead of listened, recorded instead of understood, defined instead of asked. The philosopher had become the diagnoser. A quiet shift occurred here, so subtle it still shapes everything. Before, people were neighbors, kin, citizens, family, community members. Afterward, people became cases, conditions, specimens, subjects, patients. A person's inner world was no longer theirs. It was material to be examined. Identity became symptom. Meaning became pathology. Calling became disorder. A grieving woman became melancholic. A rocking child became defective. A visionary hearing voices became dangerous. A sensitive boy overwhelmed by noise became abnormal. A poet in trance became delusional. A soldier haunted by war became broken. The culture stopped asking, "What is this person experiencing?" Instead it asked, "How do we control it?" As the worldview hardened, so did the architecture. Across Europe and America, new buildings rose, designed not for compassion, but for surveillance. Workhouses, poorhouses, infirmaries, lunatic hospitals, custodial homes, moral treatment facilities, asylums. These walls were built to separate, discipline, correct, contain, standardize, and silence. People once held by community were now held by institutions. People once honored for visions were now locked away for them. The philosophical shift had become physical: a corridor, a key, an iron door. But that is for next time. We are done for this one. Thank you for staying with me through this descent. From the caves where the sorcerer danced in firelight to Isaac Newton's cosmic mind. From the Heyoka who laughed with grief to the Pythia who spoke truth to empires. I hope you enjoyed going through what neurodivergent people were looked at. I found that super amazing. It actually gave me goosebumps when I started researching it, and how respected neurodivergent people are. That is something that is really special, and that I feel that is happening more nowadays as well, as I think there is a bit of a conscience shift, I hope. Well, we'll see. If you need to rest before part 2, rest. Move your body, step outside, let the air remind you that you are here and whole and not what they tried to name you. Part 2 will be out in 3 weeks, and that's where the philosophy enters buildings, where the worldview grows iron doors and locked corridors, where the diagnosers arrive with clipboards and the ancient minds begin their long fight back. Please do show your support if you enjoy these threads. Follow Bloodline on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Leave a rating, a 5-star rating. Yes, could be good. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. I think there's quite a lot of people nowadays that need just a soft, warm hug. So if there's anyone that you know that would benefit from listening to these episodes, please do share it. Word of mouth goes a really long way. And you can find me on Instagram at Bloodline Myths, or on TikTok at A Bloodline, A Story We Forgot to Tell, or on the YouTube channel. And while you're there on Instagram following Bloodline Myths and leaving a comment, don't forget to pop over at Bazaar 13 page. Go and check her out. Absolutely amazing. Promise you will not regret it. I'll see you in 3 weeks. Until then, rock when you need to, dream when you can, and remember, the oldest description of your mind was not a diagnosis. It was a calling. Bye!